has claimed the US is planning to force aid convoys into the country through the closed borders with Brazil and Colombia. A standoff is now developing there as soldiers are preventing aid trucks from entering. The Venezuelan foreign minister spoke to the media after meeting with the UN Secretary General.
This so-called humanitarian assistance is being forced into Venezuela without regard for the law. The Secretary General is watching the situation closely, and we are maintaining constant communication with him.
The 23rd of February, in a few hours, local time in Venezuela, the deadline for when humanitarian aid must be delivered to the country. Now, at this point, we're seeing rising tensions. From what we understand, there have been clashes at the border. Now, we're hearing that Guaido himself is in Colombia, despite the fact that he was banned from actually leaving the country. We've heard from the U.S. State Department in response to a question from the Russian news outlet RIA Novosti. They have dismissed the concern that this is anything other than basic humanitarian aid.
The peaceful transport missions were planned at the request of the Department of State, in close coordination with USAID and with the approval of the government of Colombia. Any claims that these shipments are something other than humanitarian aid are simply preposterous.
The Russian Foreign Ministry has spoken up and said that the USA intends to deliver weapons and escalate the crisis with some kind of intervention in Venezuela.
The delivery of the weapons to Venezuela is planned for the beginning of March this year, in several stages via the neighboring country, using the cargo planes of international companies.
Elliot Abrams, who is the U.S. Special Representative for Venezuela, was involved in the smuggling of weapons into another country, Nicaragua, during the 1980s under the pretext of humanitarian aid. He does have a record of claiming that humanitarian aid is being delivered while, in fact, weapons are being smuggled in. It's important to note that the deadline is set for the 23rd in just a few hours, and we're seeing reports that there has been a great deal of unrest near Venezuela's border with Brazil. That border has been closed down. Now we're hearing Guaido calling for it to be reopened. We understand that there was a demonstration, and from what's being reported, we're seeing that the report is that the military opened fire into the crowd. 2 people are reported to have been killed. 3 more are in critical states in the hospital. It's also being reported that a local mayor is indicating that among the crowd were members of the military. Now, it's also important to note that at this point we're hearing John Bolton blame all the violence and all the conditions in the country squarely on the shoulders of the President Maduro.
Yesterday, Colombia reiterated the Lima Group's call to the Venezuelan armed forces not to block humanitarian channels. Those who follow Maduro's orders of violence will be held accountable.
The Russian ambassador to the United Nations has spoken up and said that if the United States were to engage in any provocations or try to pursue any actions in relation to this date set on the 23rd, that there would be a group of countries in the UN that would be prepared to take action at the Security Council. So people are waiting to see what happens next. Very tense scene near the Venezuelan and Brazilian border.
Venezuela's self-proclaimed leader, Juan Guaido, is now in Colombia, where he's been meeting with officials. He says the Venezuelan military helped him get there, despite the armed forces proclaiming their loyalty to the Maduro government. Meanwhile, an anti-Maduro concert has been held on the Colombia-Venezuela border, dubbed Venezuela Live Aids. RT's Dan Cohen was there.
This is actually one of the most geopolitically hot spots in the world right now. Behind me on my right, you can see the Tienditas bridge crossing between Colombia and Venezuela. I'm on the Colombian side where this concert is happening. It was organized by Richard Branson, the British billionaire. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
I then saw an interview with Juan Guaido, who was asking for the world to help, and I decided to pick up the phone and speak with him and see what we could do to help. And that was 3 weeks ago with Bruno on the phone as well. And he said he felt a wonderful concert, wonderful free concert on the border to illustrate, through music, the importance of letting relief into the country would be wonderful.
Now, the Venezuelan government is holding its own concert on the other side of the border, and President Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, has said that he has accepted humanitarian aid. That Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, has accepted humanitarian aid through the European Union, through the United Nations. So, this looks like a very festive atmosphere, but there's been, and some people are certainly here just having fun, but there's also a very heavy political ideology here, a political pretext. We've heard a lot of cursing of the Venezuelan president, and this is one of the reasons that the Red Cross and many other major international humanitarian organizations have refused to participate in this, saying it is, in the words of the Red Cross, not humanitarian aid.
Historian Kevin Young believes the U.S. has no real intention to help the Venezuelan people.
What's very clear is that what Washington is trying to do and what the opposition led by Guaido in Venezuela is trying to do is to provoke the Venezuelan government into violence, into repression, into extreme action. Trying to provoke it to do something which could be used as a justification for U.S. military action. The sanctions against the economy, illegal under international law, of course, have cost Venezuela $6 billion. So when you compare that amount to the amount of so-called humanitarian aid that's being pledged from the U.S. and from Richard Branson in this crass political spectacle, it's very apparent that not only is that money a drop in the bucket, comparatively speaking, but the motives behind it are nothing but cynical. If the United States or Richard Branson or the Venezuelan opposition had any interest in helping the people of Venezuela, in helping the cause of economic recovery in Venezuela, they would pressure for an immediate end to U.S. sanctions, which are causing so much damage.
While the Venezuelan opposition blames the government for severe food shortages, one investigative journalist in Caracas says not everything is as it seems. Max Blumenthal visited a supermarket. This is what he found.
I feel lost in the supermarket coming here in Caracas. This is cheeses. There's a lot of cheeses and meats here. Fish heads, roly-poly fish heads. Okay, we got like congealed meat. We got like so much meat. There's a lot of meat here. This is the fruit section. We got a lot of mangoes. Oh, aloe vera. That'll match with my toilet paper, the aloe vera. Finally found my shampoo and conditioner. Took me like a while to do that because there are so many varieties. Damn you, Maduro! My video was a response to U.S. media, which is embedded with the Venezuelan opposition and with USAID right now on the Colombian border in Cucuta, and doing this humanitarian intervention propaganda show where they're actually claiming that there are no basic goods in Venezuela at all. And I was showing that in a fairly upscale neighborhood in Caracas, the supermarket looks just like the supermarkets in my hometown of Washington, D.C. I can also tell you that I was out today in some of the poorer areas of Caracas, and I actually encountered the vice president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, and the mayor of Caracas, Erica Farias, at open-air food markets around the city where food is being distributed basically for free to the poor and working class communities. The problem here is with speculation. There are high prices on foods in random situations. So that has to do with actually the kind of capitalist class here that supports the opposition. U.S. sanctions are actually allowing them to hoard goods and to make maximum profit. And so that's the irony here, is that many of the supporters of the opposition and the big business forces behind the opposition are actually cashing in on the economic crisis.